So our next speaker, some of you may know already, his name is Patrick Murfin. He is a lifelong labor and social justice activist. As a young man, he was a member of the Industrial Workers of the World, the historic militant labor union known as the Wobblies. He served them in many capacities, including as an organizer, a speaker, editor of the Industrial Worker, and General Secretary Treasury. He has lived in McHenry County for more than 30 years, where he has been a fixture and sometimes the face of numerous social justice causes. He was a co-founder of the Diversity Day Festival here on the square and hosted the event for 11 out of the 13 years it was held. Patrick was also active in the Democratic Party of McHenry County, retiring last year after nearly 30 years as a precinct representative and a former party secretary and chair. Since 2005, he has maintained the labor blog Heretic, Rebel, A Thing to Flout, where he continues to write about labor history, social justice, and the Woodstock and McHenry County community. Let's have a big round of applause for Patrick Murfin.
Howdy. Glad to be back here on this in this gazebo. I spent a lot of time here over the years. It feels kind of comfortable. I haven't been behind a microphone here for 2 or 3 years, and I'm glad to be here and hope I don't bore you too much. Some of what I'm about to say you've heard earlier, but you know what speakers say. Tell them once. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you just told them, and then summarize it. I want you all to take a look over here. The red brick building with the brand new copper dome is the old McHenry County Courthouse. Next to it, a little lighter colored, is the jail. That is the jail where Eugene V. Debs was held after the Pullman strike, along with his entire executive board. He was put there after the strike was crushed to keep the workers of Chicago from storming the Cook County jail and liberating him. You heard the story earlier, if you were here long ago, of how he spent his time here. And he spent his time in study. Victor Berger came down and brought a bunch of books. He and his fellow workers spent his months here studying. He came in a simple trade unionist, and he left a socialist and a committed revolutionary unionist. And in doing so, he changed the face of American history. My favorite story about Debs and Woodstock, however, is the story of his release, which you also heard a little bit, but I want you to picture it. It's a cool day in November. The leaves are off the trees, and the trees were much smaller. I've seen pictures. He and his executive board were released by the jail, given a good hearty handshake by his good friend George Eckert, the sheriff. And this square was filled with more than 5,000 people. That was more people than lived in Woodstock. But it included many Woodstock people, because Woodstock was an industrial city. Oliver Typewriter was getting off the ground, and a dozen other important industries were located in Woodstock. Workers came from all across northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin to be here. And when he emerged from that jail door, the workers of Woodstock and the workers of northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin hoisted him to their shoulders. They came through this square, they marched around it, and they walked down Main Street to the train station where the Debs Special was waiting to take Eugene V. Debs to Chicago, where 5 times that many workers were ready to greet him. Now that is the heritage that we have here in Woodstock. And I also want you to imagine all of the very comfortable Republican establishment of Woodstock in those days. And it was a Republican establishment even back then. I want you to imagine what they must have felt when they saw 5,000 workers in their own town with Eugene V. Debs on their shoulders. And then, if you're a Woodstockian or a McHenry County person, be mighty proud. What is really important is the linkage between Debs and the Pullman strike and Labor Day. Every other country in the world virtually celebrates Labor Day on May 1st. Why? Because it commemorates the so-called martyrs of Chicago, the Haymarket martyrs who were hung in 1886, supposedly for throwing a bomb during a labor rally at the Haymarket during a citywide general strike for the 8-hour day. Samuel Gompers, of all people, went to an international congress and made the motion to make Labor Day, May Day, Labor Day. And it's celebrated all over the world. And in Mexico, it is known as La Dia de los Muertos de Chicago. May Day represented militant unionism. And during these years, from about the time of the Great Railway Strike in 1877 that swept this nation like wildfire, all the way to the end of the Depression and the dawn of World War II, there was a class war in this country. And I don't mean that idly. I mean a shooting class war with dead bodies, jailed people, disappeared people, martyrs by the thousands. It was a war waged by the bosses and by their cronies in the state and federal and local governments. And it most often, like it did in the Pullman strike, crushed the aspirations of the workers. The story of labor history in this country is the story of unimaginable sacrifice against overwhelming odds and the refusal to keep laying down after having been beaten there time after time after time after time again. In 1895, when the Pullman strike started, and you'll be hearing a lot more detail about that, Grover Cleveland, a Democratic president, against the advice of a Democratic governor in Illinois, John Peter Odgeld, a true hero who you should learn about, called in federal troops to crush the Pullman strike. In Chicago, they were all over the country, but they concentrated in Chicago where the Pullman factories were and where the greatest railway yards in the country were. Cavalry with drawn sabers rode down workers. At least 30, maybe more, were killed. And the strike was crushed, as so many other strikes had been crushed. Debs and an entire executive board were arrested and charged with conspiracy to disrupt the mails because the railroads attached a Pullman car to every mail train in the country. Grover Cleveland had crushed that strike, but politically he needed the support of Northern workers. So he supported and got the support of Republicans, particularly Mark Hanna and the Civic Federation, to pass through Congress and sign into law Labor Day as we know it today. Labor Day had an origin as a local labor festival in New York City. It was not celebrated nationally. But 6 days after the Pullman strike was crushed, Grover Cleveland signed the bill that established Labor Day as a federal holiday. So we owe this occasion to a sop thrown to us, a bone thrown to us, a bribe thrown to us. But we'll take it. We'll seize it gladly and re-establish it as a celebration of workers, the labor movement, on an equal with the May Day that we'll also celebrate.
Yeah.
Now, the most important thing to realize is that the struggle that went on all those years, when all those bodies were stacking up, and all those men and women were being imprisoned, and all those families evicted and starving, and all the miles that Mother Jones and the child laborers marched, those issues and those things are living today. Why? Because in the last 50 years, a counter movement has arisen to destroy the labor movement, and it's been successful to a large degree, and largely because tons of money funneled into by people like the Kochs, and that started way back in the 50s when the Koch's daddy founded the John Birch Society, to spending money to convince American workers, among other things, that they don't need unions. That unions were taking money out of their pockets and restricting their liberties. They succeeded by panicking workers about jobs, by sending them overseas and then turning around and blaming the unionized workers as if those jobs were not going to go overseas anyway. They did it by buying the Republican Party, lock, stock, and barrel, and establishing a right-wing junta that has taken over many state governments.
Right.
Today, the labor movement is finally beginning to stir again. It is waking up from its own somnambulance. It was punch drunk. And frankly, some of the labor movement was fat and lazy and out of touch with its own membership. The labor movement of today is realizing it cannot be that anymore. The labor movement of today is realizing that it must be responsive to the needs of workers, including the millions and millions of unorganized workers that are now outside of it. And the working people of this country are doing what they have always done, which is reinventing their organizations from the ground up. And where there are not unions in place in the traditional sense, they are forming new kinds of organizations to meet the needs of the emergency. And we've seen that repeatedly. We saw that in Wisconsin. Yes, labor unions were there and led a lot, but most of those people surrounding the State House all those months through that bitter winter of Scott Walker's first term were not card-carrying union members. But a movement, a popular movement of working people arose that refused to be beaten down.
Preach, brother!
We've seen it in the Occupy movement, which just a few short years ago swept this country and put it in something of a panic, so much of a panic that it suddenly got hushed up as if it had never happened.
Preach!
That was working people reinventing their own voice, asserting their own authority over their own lives. We even see it today as the bosses, as they have always done, take every opportunity to divide us by language, race, religion, sex, and any other way they can chop and dice us apart.
Amen. We won't buy it.
That is why the rise of the immigrant rights organizations led by immigrant workers, documented and undocumented, and the support that they've gotten from American workers of other skin colors and cultures who are waking up to the fact that they have been used is so important. That is even why, as controversial as it may be to some people, the Black Lives Matter movement counts. Why the Moral Mondays movement in North Carolina that has resurrected the historic civil rights movement and married it to the labor movement is so important. And that's why, frankly, we need also a political expression, and there is no one in this country who is making a voice for that political expression better than the man who so admired Eugene V. Debs that he once made a wonderful documentary about him. The man who inherits the heritage of Eugene V. Debs and the platform of 1916 with the Socialist Party, which called for Social Security, an end to child labor, an 8-hour day, on and on and on. The platform that was eventually adopted and enforced by the New Deal. There's only one candidate who is forging a movement to bring that expression to politics. And you know what? They cannot believe it. The media's jaws are still on the floor. They cannot believe that in red states like Alabama and Mississippi, thousands of people turn out. They cannot believe that this message is resonating from a goddamn self-proclaimed socialist named Bernie Sanders.
Yeah!
Now, we've got a lot of work to do. We've got a tremendous amount of work to do. We've got work in our own job locations. We have to rebuild the labor movement. We have work in the streets. We have the work of defense, and we have the work of offense. And we have the work of electoral politics. And I'm calling you to answer that call. Answer it with more urgency than you had when you came here. I'm asking you to reach out to each and every one of your friends and neighbors and enlist them in all the aspects of this cause. Because it's not just one thing. It's got to be all of them. Are you with me?
Yeah!